What's up, guys? This is Kensuke from KensukeART.com, author and illustrator for Manga for Dummies and Figure Drawing for Dummies. And today we're going to be covering Perspective 102. Now, what does 102 mean? Well, it basically means that we're going to take the concepts that we learned in 101 video that I did a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to take it a step further. And that also means I'm going to try to cover some of the issues that people have raised about Clip Studio Paint in the comment section. Thank you very much, guys, for participating, and address it to the best as I can. So without further delay, let's get started. I have here a rough sketch that I did based off of a simple building I found in Pinterest, and I'm going to show you how I would approach using the Clip Studio Paint's perspective tool. Now, we all know that in Clip Studio, in basic perspective, that there is 1 point perspective, 2, and a third point perspective. Here, I'm going to use a 2 point perspective, which just basically means that I'm going to have my horizon here. This is the horizon line, and one vanishing point, and another vanishing point with 2 perspective guidelines coming out from them. If I wanted to add a third, that would mean that I would have to put another additional perspective way up here. But since we are such a wide-angled focal length, I don't think that it makes sense to zoom out so much without using the perspective tool in Clip Studio Paint. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that this blue guideline here is turned on, so it won't distract us from making the marks that we do need to be making with the perspective guidelines. You can find the perspective guideline here in the rulers, ruler, down here, perspective, and I'll click another layer here. Okay, I'm going to draw my first perspective line around here. Now, one of the comments that I received on YouTube is in the comment section is the rulers don't quite align up where I want my building lines to be, and that's totally understandable. There is a way to approach that, and I'm going to make one strong suggestion which I don't see discussed among YouTube channels, and it is that using guidelines, perspective guidelines, not the no. There's this one guideline here. You can say a grid. That'll give you a grid, but this does not fall into perspective guidelines. That's not what we're talking about here. What I'm talking about is if I go ahead and hit my object select button here, click on one of my rulers, you're going to see a new tab that opens up right here under Tool Properties. Now, if you go down, you're going to see a perspective ruler, snap, fixed eye level, horizontal eye level, and grid. This is an awesome tool, guys, and I really recommend everybody to take advantage of it. What this allows you to do, and I want to click this one, and as you see, it's drawing a perspective line based on the vanishing points that I've created. Okay, so this one goes for the left, right, and the XZ is basically my horizon line. Now, what this allows me to do is it helps me kind of preconceive how my building is going to look based on the fact that it's based on a geometric cube structure. Now, looking at this, I can start to see it's like, well, I can adjust how far by clicking on my perspective guidance, how wide or narrow do I want my focal length to be. Now, if you guys haven't heard me discuss about the focal lengths, wide and narrow, basically what it is the more closer the lines get, the vanishing points get here, the more wider your focal length becomes. If you distance the vanishing points further out, it becomes more narrow. Now that sounds a little bit confusing. I would strongly recommend everybody to check out Ruben Laura. He's another YouTuber who's really good tutorials on Clip Studio Paint. He has an excellent lesson on perspective. I strongly recommend checking his channel out. I'll go ahead and put his channel links in the descriptions below. This allows me to kind of adjust my angles in such a way that I can better visualize where my my lines will possibly land. And once I have my horizon line established, I can click raise and lower the horizon line. And that's about right. And another thing that I do want people to take advantage of are the little organizational tools that you see here. It can be confusing. This is basically the master, which basically moves the whole entire grid around. We don't want to mess around with too much with that. And if it gets in the way, you can use this little circle icon to move this master layout out of the way in case it overlaps your drawing. This one, one more thing I need to tell you. Before you go ahead and start tinkering with the perspective guidelines, it's always important to get these little things out of the way towards, oops, sorry. Let's go ahead and select that again. Shoot, sorry. Out of the way. See, I got confused because they're so out there. It's always important to move these things out of the way so you don't get confused or click them by mistake. Okay, now it doesn't matter if I move them around. The horizon lines are established, the grids are drawn. Okay, and another thing is this line right here. You want to drag it where the two planes connect with each other. So this plane right here is facing towards my left, and this plane faces towards the right. And this is where it meets. So I'm going to drag it right around that area. And I can tell, because of this perspective guidelines, I can already tell where my drawings are going to fall, where my drawing is a little bit off. For example, down here it's going to be a little bit off. This is going to be a little bit off. So let's go and see how this perspective ruler can help better define our drawings. Click on New Layer. Select my favorite pen tool. Guides are showing me that I might have to readjust my guidelines here, my perspective rules, because they're a little bit too harsh. In other words, they're too wide. Okay. And here. Around that horizon line is a little bit crooked. I want to reestablish that, and I reestablish the angle of my horizon by clicking on this with my object selection tool and simply dragging left or right to adjust the angle. Now if you wanted to lock in place, you hit the shift button and it'll constrict your movement to 45-degree angles. Since I don't want the horizon line moving around too much when I'm drawing, I'm going to click fix the eye level. And what this does is, let's say for example I wanted to go ahead and without it, I can go ahead and click and move the horizon line like this. But once I click it, this will not move. It's locked in place. I can drag my focal length, change the focal length, but I cannot change the horizon line. Now this is a little bit of a quick fix, I should say, because it really doesn't mean much, because here, if I click on here, I can still change the horizon line. But it's just one less thing you have to worry about. I recommend clicking this once you have a good idea of how you want to start your drawing. Because once you draw, you can't change you can't edit the drawing to match the new revised focal length. Another tip that I would recommend is once you have fixed the focal length right here, check the fixed eye level. You can then go ahead and edit your focal length based on this, and it will stick to that horizon line and just change the focal length, which is really nice in case you need to make quick edits. All right, so we're ready to dive in. I'll check my brush. As I'm creating a door here, I'm using these guidelines to see how narrow or wide do I need to be making these doors. Now it's a little bit of a observation and estimate based on drawing experience, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier as opposed to trying to make wild guesses. For example, now I know that this is the center because it's like evenly spaced. This is the center of where the door divides, and that corrects my initial drawing where my doors were a little bit too wide. Okay, now as you see right here, this line attached itself to the second perspective and made a line that I don't want to quite create yet. This leads to the other issue another YouTuber raised is, how can I eliminate that from happening? In other words, if I'm drawing and I want to finish this side of my plane, I don't want to ruin or waste time fixing and hitting the undo button so that I can go back and create the same mistake. That's a very good question. And how you do it is you go ahead and deactivate the second perspective plane, and you can do that by going and hitting the object selection tool, hitting that second plane, and you'll see this little diamond right here. I'm going to try to zoom in here. Okay, this diamond, this little tiny little bit diamond, you're going to click that, and that you'll see a little X run through it. And instantly you'll see an X run through that. That basically says is this guideline no longer works, and you are then therefore no longer bound by that guideline. And as you'll see right here, let's get back to the same layer. I can keep on drawing without having to worry about picking up that second guideline, which is really, really nice. Now, one thing I forgot to do, and I do recommend you guys doing, is make sure if you're drawing a perspective drawing, use the vector layer. Now, the vector layer you can find all the way up here. This is the raster layer. This is the vector layer. You see the pop-up coming up. Now, you want to hit the vector layer. I'm going to start working on the vector layer instead. And the reason is, and I'll show you in just a second, it's really, really cool. You don't want to miss this. Now, of course, the perspective line is not foolproof. You are going to run into some issues where the lines don't 100% match what you had in mind. In other words, your concept might be more, it won't match the concept or the vision that you had in mind. And that goes with everything. You're not going to find a tool that perfectly meets all your needs. But at least this comes really close. And of all the tools I've seen, it saves so much time. And like I said in 101, Nothing's more frustrating than not finding the long enough ruler to help establish that second baseline perspective. Alright, so I'm almost done with this plane here. If you still find like your lines aren't aligning correctly, it's always good to draw, or it's always good to decrease the speed at what you're drawing. By doing so, you're going to be able to help avoid making those usually overlooked common mistakes. And I made plenty of them too myself. Trust me. Now, when I'm drawing the roof, this top of the roof is not going to conform to the perspective line that I have. And therefore, I'm going to have to temporarily deactivate this line as well. I'm going to have to deactivate this perspective line by going around, by clicking on here. You're going to see the master. Click on the X, and it'll change color. It just changed from blue to green. And that should allow me to draw freely without worrying about the perspective line. Now, one thing you want to make sure is you always draw on a separate layer than your perspective guidelines. What will happen is when you click on the guideline with your object selection tool, it's going to shift back to that guideline, and you always want to be mindful of clicking back to the perspective line before you go ahead and make your drawings. It's a pain in the neck, but life ain't easy. Click my draw tool, find my center line, which is around there, and actually this roof line connects very close to perspective line on the second plane, so I'm going to write on that a bit. That's where the center meets from the edge to the center of this geometric triangle shape. The isosceles. I always liked saying that, isosceles. It has a little bit of ring to that. It's kind of ironic because I really failed geometry. I was not a very good math student. I don't know about you guys. Math was tough for me. Hey, math geeks out there, I'm envious of you guys. Now I'm going to shift my attention towards the second perspective plane. To reactivate it, let's find that plane here. See, I'm going to click on it again, and it becomes clear. That means all set to go. And this one is no longer needed for now, so I'm going to temporarily suspend it. Hit that, you see a cross coming through, means that plane is no longer being considered. Click on my drawing layer. You'll notice, for the most part, the lines that I'm making are fairly close to what I had in my rough sketch. And that's all thanks to this grid line here, this perspective grid. It helps me make a better, accurate choice what my lines are going to be. And I'm using these grid lines, how the shapes fall back in perspective. I'm kind of using that as a guide to realize how far apart do I need to design work. Might divide that in half, divide that in half, divide that half. So now the spaces are equidistant, or more or less, but they also obey the rules of the perspective. Some might be off. Oh, that one's off. At this point, I'm ready to add more detail into my drawing, and I don't want to be bothered by this guideline, so I'm going to turn the guideline off. I mean, the perspective guides off, and I can do so by simply clicking here on my guidelines and unclick these boxes. Oops, what happened here? Oh, sorry, I gotta click these too. This was left checked. So I'm sorry, I misspoken. They had to be blue, not green. Green basically means that it's not working. So green mean, blue true. Yes, I just came up with that. So now earlier I stressed the importance of working with vector, and what I wanted to say is it helps you eliminate all these little lines and erroneous marks faster if you're working on vector. So in bitmap, let's say I have to individually erase all that little line artwork that goes beyond where I want it to go. And that takes time. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can do it, but it takes time. Whereas in vector, let's say if I create it goes like this, it's like a checkered, and I wanted to get rid of some of the lines that go across, all I have to do is hit my eraser tool, make sure it's selected to vector, get a smaller enough eraser so that it fits between lines, and it automatically calculates which lines to erase, which is amazing. It saves, oops, not that one, saves time. Strongly recommend it. So I also cover that in one of my earlier videos about vector erasing. Definitely check that out. But before I call it done, I'm going to colorize it really quickly with my grayscale, quick grayscale shading. If you guys haven't checked out the 20-second shading in grayscale, do definitely check it out. Hit colorize. Colorize all. Hit yes. Processing, processing, processing. Edit. Tonal correction, hue, saturation, luminosity, and decrease the saturation to that. Click done. So I hope you found this video useful. Let me know if you have any questions or comments in the sections below. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn that notification button on and share with your friends. Until then, in Christ's peace, bye.